Hey, welcome to the Noble Wise Men podcast, where anything is possible all through Christ. I'm your host, Kevin Leon, and I'm just an ordinary guy whose life was transformed by someone truly extraordinary. I believe that no one is too far gone, and it's never too late to start changing our thoughts and our behaviors for the better. The Noble Wise Men podcast was created to help young men in their pursuit of truth, virtue, values, morals, mindsets, and perspectives. We release new episodes every single Monday, and you can visit us on our website at www.noblewisemen.com. There you'll find links to all of our social media so you can subscribe and not miss out on any of our content. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode, where I'll be talking about some of the many different arguments for the existence of God. Let's get right into it. So jumping right on into it, I want to be honest with you guys. I tried so hard to fit all this within a 45-minute time frame, but there's just no chance that I'm going to be able to do that. So I've come to peace with the fact that I'm not going to be able to give you the best descriptions and in-depth, dissertations, whatever you want to call it, for all the arguments and give you all the evidence and do all that kind of stuff. I've come to peace with that. My goal and my agenda for this episode, I just want to be very transparent and very clear. I don't expect anyone to convert overnight. I don't expect anyone to change their beliefs after watching this episode. My only goal and my only intention for this is just to get you to start thinking a little bit, not just about the existence of God, but about your own beliefs, why you believe the things that you do. And I just want you to start seeking a little bit more, start searching a little bit more, maybe get a little bit more interested in those kinds of topics and dig a little bit deeper than just whatever stage that you're currently at. So coming to peace with that, I just want to share a few resources with you first, just so that way, if you do want to continue on seeking and searching and looking for answers and reflecting on why you think what you think and believe what you believe, I want to give you some resources. The first one is this book right here. This is the book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and it's written by Norman L. Geisler and Frank Turek. Frank Turek, he runs a company, a firm, a ministry that's called Cross-Examined, and you can find him on YouTube. I highly recommend that you check him out. He has a lot of great information on there, and he goes in real depth for all these arguments, and you can also read that book, which goes real in depth. Also, please check out Cliff and Stuart Nettle. They are on YouTube as well. You can find their YouTube channel, Ask Cliff. They do such a phenomenal job. They're very intelligent gentlemen. They're very wise. They are very well read. They know a lot more about any of the stuff than I can possibly share with you in this episode. So I encourage you to look at some of their episodes, listen to what they have to say. They really help you think through different ideas, different topics, different questions that people have when it comes to God, Christianity, religion, all these different kinds of things. They usually go out to different college campuses and universities to help students think through these issues. So I I cannot recommend enough that you check those people out. Really. So with that being said, I want to do my best to jump on in here. But this episode is definitely very, very influenced on Cliff, on his son Stuart, and on Frank Turek. So I'm going to give you a disclaimer at the start. You're going to have to bear with me because there's going to be a lot of thinking involved in this. And I'm going to do my best to be clear and concise and try to make things make sense. I don't know how well I'll be able to do that, so have fun. Join me in and come along for the ride. But the first thing I want to go for, two things I guess I can say to start off with, is the one thing I kind of have to put out on the table and just help you to understand is you cannot prove anything 100%. There's absolutely nothing that you can prove with 100% certainty. And we also don't live our lives based on 100% proofs or 100% certainties. In any area of your life, you look at the evidence, you look at the data, you look at your past experiences, the reputation, whatever it is, you form decisions, and in every area, you take a little bit of a leap of faith, whether it's a teeny tiny one or a huge one. And I know some of you guys are probably already checking out because I'm saying that. That's an example I can give you. if you go to the doctor for your annual physical and your doctor prescribes you medicine, when you go to the pharmacist to go pick it up, you don't have 100% proof, 100% certainty that what the pharmacist has given you is exactly what your doctor prescribed. No one goes back home, they bust out a chemistry kit, they test the medicine to make sure it's exactly what the doctor prescribed and it's not poison and your pharmacist isn't trying to kill you. You have reasonable belief, reasonable expectation that what the pharmacist provided is going to help you and it's what your doctor prescribed. When you jump on an airplane to go on vacation or to go travel somewhere for work or whatever the case is, you don't have 100% certainty or 100% proof you're going to make it to your destination. But when you look at the airplane, when you know who the manufacturer of it is, it's a reputable airliner, it's not just some third name, Costco, Walmart branded airplane. And no offense to Costco or Walmart, they're great places, but it's not some generic brand of airplane. You're not going to just jump on like the first ever Amelia Earhart thing and just disappear into the Atlantic. It's not what's going to happen. You have a reasonable reliability in the pilot, in the airliner. You have the proof of airplanes is the safest form of travel, has the least amount of accidents and catastrophic events and all that kind of stuff, and you have reasonable expectation to make it to where you're going to go. So to say that you need 100% proof, otherwise you can't believe in God, or you can't believe in evolution, or you can't believe in science, or this or that, is not the case. You don't live your life based on 100% proof. So that's the first thing. With that out of the way, the next issue I want to combat, or not even combat, we're not fighting. I want you to think. But the next issue that I want to talk about before we get into the arguments for the existence of God is whether or not you believe in truth. Because believe it or not, and hopefully you're not one of these people, but there are people who believe truth does not exist. There are people that believe that there are not absolutely true things in existence. And when you come across someone who believes that, or who says there's nothing that is absolutely true, you have to ask them, well, is that absolutely true? It's a self-defeating statement, right? Because to say that nothing is absolutely true, saying that statement itself is absolutely true just negates it. It flips it on its head, right? So a better example I can give you to help you visualize and think this through is that's like me saying I can't speak a word of English. Me saying that statement itself proves that statement is incorrect and that it's wrong. So you have to believe in truths, right? If we don't believe that truth exists, what's the point? Why do we have science? Why do we have philosophy? Why are we, there's no reason to pursue the truth. But if you do believe that truth exists, then we can kind of move forward in these arguments. And one other thing I do want to talk about when it comes to truth is I have this belief, which is not going to make sense when I originally say it, but as I explain it, it'll make a lot more sense. I believe that facts change and the truth never does. The truth never changes. And I don't believe that facts and truth are the same thing. And I'll tell you why. I'll explain myself. Facts can change. Something can be a fact today that tomorrow we rediscover something, we have a new understanding of it, and that fact changes. The truth never does. The truth is always the truth. Never, ever, ever changes. So an example I can give you is I distinctly remember when I was younger, when I was a kid, and they used to teach us that in your body, and if you're a little bit older, you might remember this too, they used to teach us in schools that the blood within our veins was blue. It was a dark blue blood in your veins, and they would teach that in school, and that was a fact, right? That was quote unquote the truth when they would teach it to us. That was like, no, this is how the body works. You have dark blue blood, and only when that blood comes into contact with the air, with oxygen, right? When you get cut and you start bleeding, the only reason it turns red is because of oxygen. And they used to teach us this in schools. And then later, through more science, through more studying, through all this kind of stuff, we learned that no, your blood is always red within your veins. It's only after it gets exposed to oxygen, it becomes brighter red. And the reason they used to think that it was blue is because when you look at your arms and your veins and stuff like that, you'll see kind of bluish, greenish veins running through your body. So they used to think that's the reason. But in reality, your blood was always dark red. And it just happens that when you expose it to oxygen, it becomes a brighter red. So that fact, that was once a fact that your blood is blue, when we learned the truth that your blood was always red, that became the new fact. But the truth remained. The truth always was your blood was dark red. Doesn't matter how much we believe that, and I'll give you another illustration. It doesn't matter how much we believe that your blood is blue. It doesn't change that the truth is it was always red. And an example I can give you is if I'm stepping out onto a lake, if I have a strong, firm, wholehearted, genuine belief that the ice is thick and that's going to hold me up. If that ice is really thin, it doesn't matter how much belief I have in it. It doesn't matter how much I think that it's correct. When I step out on the ice, the truth is, if it's thin ice, the truth is I'm going to fall through. It doesn't matter how much I believe in it. However, on the flip side, if I have just a little bit of faith in that ice, that it's going to hold me up, if I think, oh, this might be thin ice, but I'm not really sure. But if I have a little bit of faith in it, and the truth is that it's really thick ice, it's really going to hold me up, it doesn't matter that I have a little belief in it or a little faith in it. The truth stands, the truth remains that it is thick ice and it's going to hold me up. That may not be the best of the examples. I think the blood example is a little bit better, in my opinion. But that's just another illustration to hopefully help you think through kind of what I'm trying to get at. So those are two little housekeeping things that I wanted to talk about. And again, it's important that when we talk about truth, you understand that it exists and there are absolutely true things, whether it's about the universe, whether it's about science, whether it's about our beliefs. Some things are absolutely true and unchanging. And it's kind of our pursuit of truth, our responsibility, our obligation almost to seek out the truth. That is what brings us to that knowledge. That is what brings us to, I guess you can say, maybe not enlightenment, but that is an important thing that we do, is to pursue the truth, to get deeper understanding, deeper knowledge. That's an important thing, because if we live our lives based on lies, on falsehoods, on deceptions, that ultimately is going to lead us down a destructive path. That ultimately is going to lead us in a direction we're going to fall short. We're going to end up empty. We're going to end up meaningless. The pursuit of truth is valuable. Falsehood and deception is not. That's a little bit of an example I can give you. But why is the pursuit of truth important? For one, if a false statement, a false belief is believed, right? If a false statement is believed and acted upon, it gives you contradictory and absurd results. So for example, if there's no absolute truth, then we can't study science. We can't understand things, right? If the laws of physics are always changing, if they're not absolutely true all the time, we can't observe things. We can't record things. We can't predict, experiments and base them on. We don't have anything to measure against, right? We don't have a standard to measure our understanding upon. I hope this is making sense. But I told you, I came to peace to the fact that it might not make sense. So I'm going to do my best regardless. But I just hope that you continue to think about these things and seek them more. So why is it that if a false statement is believed and acted upon, it gives you these contrary and crazy results? An example I can give is if you believe that A and not A are both true, that's like saying war is peace and slavery is freedom. Those things cannot be true at the same time. A and non-A can't both be true. X and not X cannot both be true. So the statement that war is peace is just false. The statement that freedom is slavery, that's false. They're two contradicting things. So they cannot both be true. That's just not how that works. So this is why we have to seek truth. This is why we have that importance to find out what is correct and what is true. And before I jump into this, a question that Cliff often asks from Ask Cliff, he says, what are you living for? And what is the evidence that what you're living for is true? Because whether you realize it or not, whether you understand it or not, whether you believe it or not, everybody, every single person is living for something. And here's a good illustration. Jordan Peterson, I saw a video of his recently. He quoted from Jung, and he said, by definition, God is what you use to make sense of your life. You have a hierarchy of values, right? A hierarchy of needs, hierarchy of values. Whatever's at the top of your values, whatever is your highest importance, your number one in your life, serves the function of God for you. Meaning, even if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in a higher power, if you don't believe in the universe, or, people make up all these different kinds of things. If you don't believe in God, whatever is top priority in your life, whatever it is that you're living for, to attain, to achieve, whatever it is that's top priority, number one in your hierarchy of values, serves the function of God. It is your God, whether you understand it or not. And then he goes on to say, it may be a God you don't believe in, or a God that you cannot name, but it doesn't matter. It's God for you. What you think about God has very little impact on how God is acting within you. Whatever God it is you happen to be following. So the point that Jung is making, that Jordan Peterson was talking about from that quote, is that everybody has what is the equivalent of God in their life. Whatever is at the top of your priority list, your number one thing that you serve in your life, whatever it is that you're living for, that serves the function of God, right? And then again, Cliff asked that questions. What are you living for, and what is the evidence that what you're living for is true? Why is that? Because if you're living for something that's false, you're going to end up crumbling. If your life is built on a lie, it's going to come tumbling down eventually, and your life is going to be left in shambles. So what are you living for, and what is the evidence that what you're living for is true? So when it comes to the arguments for the existence of God, technically speaking, if I want to be smart about it, if I want to be, if I want to be smart about it, I can say, okay, done, right there, the existence of God. Everybody has God in life, because whatever's at the top of your priority list, the top of your values, that is God to you. But that's not what we're here talking about, because when we think about God and when we talk about God, especially in religious senses, what people are talking about is some sort of being, some sort of entity, some sort of deity, right? It's a thing, it's a person, it's a spirit, it's something higher and greater than ourselves. So we're not thinking about some sort of philosophical, delusion, or some sort of just like thing in your mind, something in the ether that we can't really see or touch or talk about. We're not talking about a theoretical thing. We're talking about an actual being when we think about God. So that's kind of the argument that we're going to be talking about today. And the first of the several, which again, I'm not even going to cover all of the arguments that are being made for the existence of God, but I'll talk about some of them. The first argument is that everything that has a beginning must have a cause. So as we think that through, whatever has a beginning has to have a cause. In the case of the universe had a beginning. Even atheists believe that. Even atheists admit that the universe had a beginning. We don't live in an eternal universe, even though some may try to make that argument. The universe had a beginning, right? Science currently describes that beginning as a Big Bang. So we came from a beginning in terms of energy and matter and all that kind of stuff. And as time goes on, that energy goes down, and we can see from that data that there was a beginning to the universe. This is probably very simplistic terms. If you're an astrologist, if you're into cosmology, probably not doing this justice. But we know that there was a beginning to the universe. And here's the thing. If there's a beginning, there has to be a beginner. If there's creation, there has to be a creator, right? Nothing comes from nothing. You get nothing out of nothing. Something does not come out of nothing. Something comes out of something. So you only get nothing from nothing. You do not get something from nothing. So when it comes to the Big Bang, when it comes to creation in coming into an existence, nothing comes from nothing. So we're obviously living in a world of something. We're living in a world of time, space, and matter that came into existence like that. In the blink of an eye, in a Big Bang, in a huge flash, we and the universe as we know it came into existence. What caused that to happen, right? There has to be a cause that caused creation to come into existence. And just by definition, since the universe that we live in is made up of time, space, and matter, whatever it is that caused that to come into existence, because it was never existed before, and now it existed. So whatever caused time, space, and matter to exist must by definition be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. Because if whatever caused that to come into existence, if it was part of time, then time would have existed before it. If whatever caused matter to come into existence, if it was made up of matter, then matter would have already existed. So whatever caused matter to come into existence must be immaterial. And same with space. So you have something that caused something that is not made up of time, space, or matter, but rather caused that to come into existence. That thing, whatever that cause is, must also be powerful, because obviously, as we know, with all the energy and matter that came to create the Big Bang, to bring all this stuff into existence, that is a very, very powerful, high energy event that took place. So whatever caused that must be powerful by nature. Also, it must be a personal cause. And what does that mean? You and I are personal beings. We have the ability to love. We have the ability to make friendships. We have the ability to interconnect and build relationships with one another. That is a personal thing. A rock cannot have a relationship with another rock. I cannot be best friends with a rock unless there's something wrong with me, or I have a crazy imagination, or I'm schizophrenic or something like that. Rocks don't have personalities. They're not personal beings. A tree doesn't have a personality. It's not a personal being. I can't have a relationship with a tree. I can nurture a plant, I can look after it and have a love for it, but it does not reciprocate that love because it itself is not a personal being. So the inanimate cannot create animate, right? So for example, for that, by that same line of thinking, whatever caused us to come into existence, caused us to come to creation, has to have been a personal being. We know that impersonal forces can't do anything. They can't make a choice. They can't make a decision. In order to go from a state of nothingness into a state of creation, something had to make that choice. A personal being had to make the choice to create, which also, by the same line of thinking, something that had to create and make a choice to create something, also by nature, by its definition, by logic, has to have been an intelligent mind. A mind that could think and make a decision to create. So with all this kind of, and this is just the first argument, with all this taken into account, this is called the cosmological argument and the fine-tuning of the universe. Just the fact that everything is so fine-tuned in the universe as we know it leads us to believe that there's a thinking mind that brought order and design into the universe. So when you think of a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, and loving cause, what do you think of? And even if you take loving out of it, but if you think of the spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, what does that sound like to you? Because it sounds an awful lot like what we would describe God as being. It's one of the points also. The fact that we love, that we have the ability to love, that itself shows that there is something that gave us that ability. If we are just a cosmic accident, if we are just matter and energy, chemical reactions that just happen in our brain, we would not have free will or the ability to love. But love, it has to be something that is freely given. Love and free will are two things that also argue for, are evidence for the existence of God. Because again, if you believe in evolution as an origin, and don't get me wrong, I believe in evolution as a process. I do not believe in it as an origin. All the science that we have available to us right now do not show any kind of evidence. We have nowhere even near any kind of understanding for evolution as an origin of life. As a process, yes. As an explanation for how life came about, absolutely not. We are nowhere even close. And if you want to do some more research, again, I just want to give you resources. Look up Dr. James Tour on YouTube. He is a professor of chemistry over at Rice University out of Houston, Texas. He puts out a lot of content, a lot of videos that talk about the science, the chemistry behind origin of life. And that's not really even his thing. It's just lately he's been getting into a couple of debates over it. But we're not even close to having a remote understanding of how life began. I mean, when you talk about the building blocks of life's building blocks, we have no clue what we're even talking about in terms of how things happened on their own. And the statistic probabilities of things just happening on their own, they're like, we would need more, the chances of it happening, we don't have enough time in existence from the Big Bang up until today to allow for this to happen in just its own course. Like the science, the math, they do not point towards happenstance, random chance, chemical reactions, evolution from, amoebas up until where we are today. It's laughable what we have in terms of evidence for that. So that was a little bit of a sidetrack, but look into Dr. James Tour on YouTube. He had a lot of interesting stuff out for that as well. But love, the ability to have a relationship, the ability to love, again, comes from something that gave that ability to us. If we're just chemical reactions, if we're just serotonin, oxytocin, all these different chemical reactions that are going on in our brain, and if we're just matter and energy, then we're essentially moist robots. Me being able to love someone or hate someone, you would argue, if you're consistent and if you're honest with yourself, if we came from just matter and energy and we're just atoms and molecules that aren't thinking things, that are just building blocks, that are just material, that are just, things on the periodic elemental chart, right? On the periodic table. If that is our origins, then we should not have the ability to freely love. We should not have free will. We should just be chemical reactions, if that's truly the case. But obviously our personal experience shows that is not the case. I can choose to love someone. I can choose to hate someone. I can choose to offer someone a helping hand. I can choose to kick them while they're down and turn a blind eye towards their need. That is the free will and choice that we have. But that is arguments for the existence of a God. Because if we did not have a creator, if we didn't have a God, a personal being, a loving being, a cause that brought us into existence, if we really are just chemical reactions, then morality, love, personal relationships, the transfer of information, which is just intangible things, we would not be able to have that, right? Language itself, if we're just chemical reactions and everything's a material world, right? That's materialism. If everything's just made up of molecules, you have no sense. There shouldn't be anything intangible if that were the case. If everything's just made of materials, if just from atoms and all these different kinds of things, we should not have intangible things such as love. So an example I can give you, an analogy, is for love to be true, for love to be genuine, it has to be freely given. You can't force someone to love. You can't force someone to love you, and you can't pay for it. For genuine love, it has to be freely given. It can't be something that is obligated or forced by threat, violence, anything like that. An example is if you dated somebody for 2 years and you told them that you love them, they told you that they love you. If you found out after 2 years of dating them and they always told you, I love you, I love you, if you found out that your father was paying that person, paying that girl to love you, if he was paying her $4,000 a month, for example, that every single month she goes out on dates with you, she tells you she loves you, she tells you she cares about you, that is not true, genuine love. If she's just there for the paycheck, that is not love. Sure, can she be loving? Can she be kind? Yeah, but genuine love is free. It's not something that you can force someone to have or force someone to give. And 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 to 9, and then we're going to jump over to 19. It says, Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. And then verse 19, we love because he first loved us. So when we talk about love and that real experience, we've all experienced love in some form or fashion in our lives. When we talk about that experience, that feeling, that comes from God. God is love, and that's just one of his many attributes. But if there is no God, you cannot have love. If we're just truly from an evolved amoeba throughout billions and billions of years to eventually get to where we are today, love should not exist. Because again, evolution at its core, in its root, evolution is survival of the fittest. It is the strong eating the weak. So when you talk about love, you don't have to love someone to ensure your survival, right? In fact, in terms of survival and the strong eating the weak, survival of the fittest, evolution in that kind of sense, it's probably even more beneficial not to love to get ahead in life, in the sense of, if it's survival of the fittest, if we're talking about prehistoric times or even now, to not love someone, to not do what is right in caring for someone and looking after them, and to be very self-centered, you're probably going to get farther ahead doing things like that. If you have no problem killing somebody to take something from them, if you have no problem with theft, if you have no problem stepping on people to lift yourself up or to get ahead, but you and I know that is not the right thing to do. You and I know that it's very different. For example, just the fact that we put such value on human beings shows us that there is a God. The reason I say that, the Bible says that we are made in God's image. That is where our value comes from. There's a clear difference between stepping on a cockroach or on a spider than there is stepping on a baby or stepping on a person. We know and we make that distinction, whether we consciously do it or not. We understand that human life is more valuable than the life of an animal. The reason behind that, the subconscious actual reason for that, is because we were made in the image of God and inherently we have more value. But again, if you look at life, if you look at the world through the lens of evolution, and if you're being honest with yourself and you're being consistent, then if we're just a cluster of atoms, if we're just the same molecules that just happen to get to where we are today, there should be no difference crushing a cockroach or an ant than crushing a person. There should be no difference because we're just the same cells formed into different structures. But the fact that we have free will, the fact that we have love, going based on what I said about facts, not even the fact, the truth that we have love, the truth that we have free will, we understand subconsciously or consciously that humans are more valuable than animals. We are not just a cluster of atoms, some sort of cosmic accident. We were put here for a purpose. And again, if you believe in evolution as an origin, and we're just some sort of accident of time and probability and matter and energy, then you have, if you're being honest and consistent, no real purpose of life. But if you are created by God, you have a purpose. You've been put here for a reason. You were created by a thinking thing for a purpose. Otherwise, we're just an accident. Otherwise, it makes no difference if you live your life like Adolf Hitler or if you live your life like Mother Teresa. If we were just here by accident, by chance, and nothing really matters, that there is no afterlife, then us being here on earth, living our lives, makes no difference if you're a good person or a bad person, because we're all, as Cliff says, going to end up in the same place, which is the fertilizer pit. If you decide to live your life like Adolf Hitler and create this supreme race and do what you think is best by your own view, by your own opinions, by your own delusion, whatever's going on within your mind, if you decide to live your life like an Adolf Hitler, it makes no difference than living your life like a Mother Teresa, trying to help others and do the best you can. Because ultimately, we're all going to end up in the same place. But if there is a God, if there is an afterlife, then you have a purpose. You're created here for a purpose, and there is life after death. So I kind of combined a few arguments. I glossed over a little bit of the moral argument, and that because that's one of them. The moral argument is this, and this is not to say that you have to believe in God to be a good person. No, absolutely not. There are atheists that are good people. There are agnostics who don't believe in God one way or the other. Agnostics that are good people. There are Christians that are good people, Muslims that are good people, Hindus that are good people, Buddhists that are good people. There are good people in every walk of life. You do not have to believe in a God to be a good person or a moral person. However, if there is no God, then essentially there is no standard of good. You can't tell someone you should do this or you ought to do that. as opposed to this or ought to do that. If there is no God, then again, we're just here by accident. We are just a collection of atoms that just evolved into higher thinking and higher being. But ultimately, it's meaningless. If you're being consistent and you're being honest, if you really take the time to think these things through, if we just came from nothing, if we came into existence and we're here just by chance, then everything is meaningless and there's no purpose. You have nothing to live for, nothing to live by. But the fact that there is a higher standard than just ourselves, the moral argument is essentially this. There is a moral law, a moral standard higher than ourselves. Morality, good versus evil, is not just something that we determine on the individual level or that we determine as a society. Good in itself is a reflection of God's nature. God defines what goodness is, and any deviation from that standard is what would be considered evil. So let's dig into this a little bit more. If everything is down to the individual to think of what's right or what's wrong, if everything falls upon a society to decide what's right or wrong, if you believe that as a society we understand what we should do and what we shouldn't do, that's very subjective, that changes a lot. So there are societies that existed, perfect example being Nazi Germany, that decided killing is good. Exterminating all these lower, lesser people is good for this race. It's good for this society. We're going to be better off without all these other individuals. That was a society that believed that. There are societies, for example, that are cannibals, and they believe that it's okay to eat and consume people. That society agreed on that, and they live their life that way. So if morality is dependent upon an individual or dependent upon a society, we have no right to tell the Nazis in Nazi Germany that what they did was wrong. We cannot tell the cannibals that they shouldn't eat people because as a society, they agree that that was okay. They agree that that was all right. You and I both know that that is not the case. We know that it is absolutely wrong to murder someone. It is absolutely wrong to rape someone. It is absolutely wrong for pedophiles to have relations with children. We know that there is no exception to that rule. There is never a case where it is okay to rape someone. There's never a case where it is okay to take innocent life. It is never okay to sleep and have sexual relations with a child. There's never an exception to that rule. They are absolutely, irrefutably wrong. And if you think that there are cases where that's okay, I would encourage you to please reflect a little bit more on why you think that way or why you believe that that is okay, because it is absolutely wrong. But for us to be able to say that, there has to be a standard greater than ourselves. Because again, going back to the evolution standpoint, if it really is survival of the fittest, the strong eating the weak, then you can make a case that rape would be a good thing to continue to populate the world. You can make a case that murder would be a good thing because it ensures the survival of another person or another society or whatever it is. But we understand that that's not the case. We understand that that is wrong, that you should not be doing those kinds of things. So there is a standard above ourselves. An example that Cliff uses is when it comes to Nazi Germany, when we had the Nuremberg trials, the Nazi lawyers were very intelligent, and they said, how do you Americans get off on telling Germany, on telling the Nazis what they should or should not do? Their society decided that that is okay. They came together and they agreed on their set of beliefs, on their morality, on what they thought was right or wrong. So how can you tell them what they did was wrong? And how can you judge them when you were never part of that society? And then the Nuremberg trials shut down. But then an American lawyer also stood up and said, no, there is a moral law above ourselves. There is a moral standard higher than societal standards, than individual standards, that dictates killing people is absolutely wrong. The things that Nazi Germany did were absolutely wrong, even though as a society, they were okay with it. There is something higher that we answer to. And with that argument, and again, I'm probably butchering this, go ahead and watch Cliff. He does a much more elegant way of explaining this than I can. The Nuremberg trials kicked back into operation. They started the prosecutions once again because they understood there's something higher than ourselves. There's a standard greater than what society says. And that standard comes from God. And again, stay tuned for next week's episode, because this episode is just about the arguments for the existence of God. We're not talking about the Christian God. We're not talking about the, Allah in Islam. We're not talking about the Hindu gods. We're just talking about God, a creator in the uncaused cause, the eternal being that has no creator, that has no beginning or the end, because it is the beginning and the end. It is the Alpha and the Omega. We're going to talk about that next episode. So don't, I hope you get excited for that. But this right here, and I'm trying to refrain. I'm giving you too many Bible verses, even though I just can't. It's in my nature. It's kind of what this is all about. So I'm going to still give you some more verses. But I'm trying to refrain a little bit, because this is not the episode to make the case for Christianity. This is just to get you thinking and to get your mind working, to want to look into these issues a little bit more. Look into these arguments a little bit more. See what you think about them. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Why? And just process. That's all I want you to do, is just take some of this in. Hopefully you learn something. I might not be making any sense, but I hope something out of this gets you interested, gets you thinking, gets you searching, and at least you get something out of it. But that was the moral argument. Before we continue on into a couple of the other arguments, let's hear a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm the sponsor. That's right, guys. For the podcast, for the blog, everything that you see or that you hear, from the lights to the camera to the action, it all comes out of my pocket. So for that reason, I'm sponsoring the episode. If you'd like to support me any way that you can do so by visiting www.noblewisemen.com/support me. There you'll find links to all my social media, so you can follow me on any platform that you use and stay up to date with all the content that I put out. You can also subscribe to the newsletter. That way you're up to date with all the blogs and the podcasts as they are released. Also, if you feel it in your heart and you're able to do so, if you have the means, there's also a one-time donation form on the site as well. So if you'd like to give any donations, it goes such a long way for me, and I really do sincerely appreciate it. So thank you so much. God bless you, and let's get back to the episode. Welcome back. So I want to stick to this moral argument for a second here. I want to talk about it just a little bit more, and obviously I want to read you a Bible verse. So Isaiah chapter 5, verses 20 and 21 say, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight." So unfortunately, this is the world we're living in today. People are calling evil things good, and they're calling good things evil. People are flip-flopping and backwards on a lot of things that are considered good, righteous, and moral. And they're starting to elevate things that are wicked and evil, and they're putting them in positions of being okay. An example I can give is when it comes to pedophilia, when it comes to sexual relations with children. Like I already talked about, that is absolutely, undeniably wrong. And in the world today, they're starting to make cases, and they're starting to try to make things more socially acceptable. And the pedophile, the taboo of pedophilia, they're starting to call them minor attracted persons. And they're trying to have us have sympathy for the act of sexual relations with a child. They're trying to normalize it. And we know that is absolutely, and I'm going to keep saying it, absolutely wrong. And that's just one example of them trying to take something that is totally wrong and slowly try to make it societally, as a collective, okay. They're slowly but surely trying to make that acceptable and less taboo and less vile and disgusting. They're trying to make it okay. And they start with having sympathy for the action and trying to make it seem like it's no big deal when it absolutely is. So unfortunately in life right now, in the world that we're living in, people are taking good things and they're calling them evil. And they're taking evil things and they're calling them good. And like the verses just read, Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who take darkness for light and light for darkness. So that's one of those things. When we have that standard of good, that standard that we go by is God. You can call it God, you can do whatever, but that is a standard. God in his nature and his character is good. He is just. So whenever we deviate from that standard, that is where evil comes from. And also, just so you're aware, the same argument from before as far as free will goes, probably 90 to 95% of the evil in the world is a result of free will. Us being able to make decisions on our own, again, to love or to hate, to uplift or to crush. That is where a lot of the wickedness comes from. We are all fallen, sinful, broken people. That's why God sent his one and only Son to die on a cross for us. That's why we had to be reconciled back to him through that standard, because if we did it on our own accord, we can never reach that standard. We can never reach the metric. We can never hit the mark. We always miss the mark. In the Bible, it talks about how our righteous acts are as if they are filthy rags to God. Our goodness compared to God's goodness, compared to his holiness, is like filthy rags. We can never reach that level of good. Maybe relative to our own standards, relative to other people who are worse than us, whatever it is, quote unquote, we can call ourselves good based on that standard. But compared to God, we are nowhere near good people. And now, if I were to rewind a little bit, I want to talk about another argument, which is order and design, the fine-tuning of the universe. This is one of the arguments for God. The fact that there is order and design in the universe shows us that there is a designer. Order and design don't happen by chance. They are not just accidents. Order and design, from personal experience, almost always, if not always, come from a thinking mind. It comes from an intelligent person. Design comes from a designer. My clothes that I'm wearing right now, the lights that are going on behind me, everything was coordinated by me to look this kind of way. It didn't just happen that these lights were put into place. A better example I can give is you don't look at Mount Rushmore and think, wow, that's amazing, isn't it? How wonderful that the water just eroded those mountains to look like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt and Thomas Jefferson. What are the chances of that happening? No, you look at Mount Rushmore and you think someone carved those images into the rock. That doesn't just happen by accident. That's just not part of nature. Another example is when you're walking along a beach, if you see in the sand, it's written out, Kevin loves pizza. You're not going to look at that written out in the sand and think, oh my gosh, it's amazing that the waves wrote out Kevin loves pizza. No, we understand that a thinking thing wrote that out. Messages come from messengers. Code comes from coders. Programs come from programmers. These things don't happen by accident. So if we understand that a message like Kevin loves pizza, which is only 15 letters long, by the way, if we understand that that message requires a mind to write it out, because natural forces don't create messages. Natural forces don't have a mind to make things happen. They just happen. They just do. If we can understand a 15-letter message requires a thinking mind behind it, what does that tell us about the DNA in our bodies? DNA is about 3.2 billion, with a B, billion letters long. And every single cell in our body contains that 3.2 billion long sequence. And you have to ask yourself, how many cells do we have in our body? We have about 30 trillion cells in our body. Our minds cannot even comprehend how much information that is. When you think about how long that message is in every single one of our cells, it just by logic and reason makes you think a thinking mind had to have created it. And again, code comes from a coder. Programs come from a programmer. They don't just happen. Forces of nature do not create messages. Even the simplest form of life, which is an amoeba, has 1,000 volumes worth of an encyclopedia of information in it. And that's the simplest life form. So again, for us to just say we came from an amoeba, a single cell, and by chance came about through evolution, and here we are without any outside influence, that's just not the case. And again, if you want to look at more of the scientific stuff, I highly encourage you to check out Dr. James Tour, because he gets a little bit more in depth in this kind of stuff. And this is also, just so you understand, it's not a God of the gaps argument. The argument of order and design is not a God of the gaps. We're not saying, oh no, we don't know how this happens, or we can't explain this process, so God did that. God created that. No. That's not the argument. The argument is looking at what we do know, looking at the evidence. The evidence of design points to a designer. The evidence of DNA and the sequence of what we would call software written in our genome, that points to a software programmer. That points to someone who created it, a mind, a thinking, intelligent being that created that sequence. So we're saying, look at the law and order of the universe. Look at how everything works so perfectly well together and all has systems and processes and order and design that is so perfectly, compactly together. It points to a creator. The fine-tuning of the universe points to a thinking being that created it. Romans chapter 1, verse 20 to 22, and then verse 25 say, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools." Verse 25, "They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen." So by those verses, nature itself points to God. And this is essentially the biblical version of the cosmological, teleological argument. It is that nature itself gives us the impression that there is a God, that there is a creator, so that no one is with an excuse. No one can say they never knew God, they had no idea, because creation itself testifies about it. People who are atheists, me being one of them in the past, would often say, oh no, God and religion, that's just how people used to explain, things that they didn't understand before. That's why we have science now, because now we can explain all these things, so we don't need God. It's not the case. There's a reason why people attributed the creation of God to God. It's because it's in our nature. It's innately within us. We are created to worship, and we have this innate desire to know God. And even anthropology shows us this. According to Statista.com, in 2022, only 14.4% of the global population is unaffiliated with some sort of religion. That's not even to say that 14.4% of the population are atheists, that they don't believe in God. That's just to say they're unaffiliated. I know plenty of people that still, even though they don't believe in God, they believe in the universe or some higher power. And again, just like the Bible says in those verses that we just read, they worship the created things instead of the creator. So people who worship the universe and they love the created things instead of the creator, they're foolish ultimately, because you're so close. You're that one step there, but you have, and a lot of times people don't even have an intellectual disagreement or an intellectual problem with God. They don't have a mind problem. They have a heart problem. A lot of people who don't believe in God, it's not even because there's not enough evidence to show that a God exists. It's because they have a heart issue. They don't want to submit to an authority. They don't want to follow what God tells them to do. And they want to do whatever it is that they want to do. They want to go have sex with whoever they want to have sex with. They want to go and gamble and steal, and they want to do whatever it is that they want to do. They don't want to follow the commands of God. It's not because in their minds they don't believe that there's evidence or they don't believe that it exists, but rather they don't want to submit or change their ways. They don't want to change their life because of the existence of God. Because if God truly does exist, which he does, just spoiler alert, you would have to live your life differently. If you came to terms and realization that God exists, there has to be some sort of change within you that you're like, okay, I should probably look into this. I should probably, faced with this reality, I have a decision to make. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to make that decision because they want to put themselves in the place of God. They want to determine for themselves what is right and what is wrong, what they should and should not do, what they can and cannot do, especially in America when it comes to, land of the free, home of the brave. People don't want to have their freedom restricted. They have a problem with authority. And it's ingrained within us. We have this desire, this yearning for God. And there's a reason that when you look around the world, pretty much 85% of people are affiliated with some sort of religion. Anthropology shows us that in our nature, we are ingrained to have some sort of seeking and yearning for God. And we see in a 2019 article by the Pew Research Center, in America, only 4% of adults are atheists, and 5% are agnostic, meaning they don't really know one way or the other. So you can see the vast majority of people have some sort of desire to know a personal being. I can promise you, the day that comes when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to enjoy the idea of you're part of God and he's part of God and your death is just part of God and, there's nothing after this, or you're going to come back and be reincarnated into a cockroach or something like that. You want to have a relationship with a personal being who understands your suffering, who understands what you're going through, who has created you and knows you better than anyone knows you themselves, better than you know yourself. And that is found in Jesus Christ, who came down as God in human form, suffered in every way that we suffered, bled and died on the cross for you and I. That is a personal being, a personal God that can understand and relate to you. And Frank Turek gives this analogy, which I think is really good. For someone who is an atheist, who doesn't believe in God, or an agnostic who's kind of on the fence either way, doesn't really know, doesn't believe in or not believe in, they're just kind of on the fence. Frank Turek gives this analogy. If a detective is trying to solve a murder case, they might show up on the crime scene, look at all the evidence, and then say, I think this is the guy who committed the murder. If another detective shows up on the crime scene and they look at the evidence and they say, you know what? I lack a belief that your guy is the true suspect. The first detective might say, okay, that's fine. Tell me why you lack a belief in it. And the second detective might even give him some reasons why he lacks a belief. But if the first detective says to the second, okay, well, who do you think committed the crime? If that second detective says, oh, well, I don't have a suspect. I just lack a belief that your guy is the right guy. I don't have to give you another suspect. I'll ask you this question. You can answer for yourself because obviously I'm not going to hear you. Is that guy a good detective? No. He can't just say, well, I lack a belief that your guy is the true guy and then just retire. He has the burden of proof of giving another explanation, another suspect that is a better way, that is the true suspect who actually committed the crime. And Frank also says, it's easy to sniff out a rotten egg. It's harder to lay a better one. And what does that mean? It's easy just to say, oh, I don't believe in that, or I don't believe in you, or I don't believe in God, or whatever it is. That's a cop-out answer. You're not providing any substance. You're just making a statement about your mental state, about what goes on in your mind. It says nothing about the reality that exists outside of your mind. So you're making a baseless statement, and that's just allowing you to just brush it off and continue living in la-la land without having to face reality, without having to actually think through these issues and decide, is there a God? Is there not a God? You can't just say, well, I lack a belief, and now I have no issues. I can just keep on doing whatever I want to do. Reality exists. Truth exists. The pursuit of truth is important. Again, I'll ask you this question that Cliff asks. What is it that you're living for? And what is the evidence that what you're living for is true? So I understand a lot of these arguments may not have made a lot of sense. I don't know how well I articulated them, but my goal is not to explain them fully within this one episode. My goal is to get you interested, to hopefully purchase this book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Watch Cliff and Stewart on YouTube. Watch Frank Turek on YouTube. Look up a couple James Tour videos. I want you just to get interested, to start seeking more on your own. Start actually thinking about, why do you believe what you believe? Why do you think what you think? Because your beliefs form your opinions. They form the view of your world. They influence your decision making. So why do you believe what you believe? And what is the evidence that what you believe is true? When it comes to some of these arguments we talked about, without ever having to open up a religious document, even though I know I shared some verses with you, because I think they are still very, very, very beneficial, even though we're not talking about Christianity in this episode. We're just talking about God in general. Without ever having to open up a religious document, we see that there is some sort of God that exists. Things, creation points to a creator. Order and design point to a designer. Moral law, a standard of moral goodness points to a moral law giver, a moral standard giver. Free will, personal relationships, these point to things that should not just come by happenstance, by chance, with creation of matter and energy, right? Rocks, flowing water doesn't decide to flow down the river. Water just follows the path of least resistance. It doesn't make a choice one way or the other. So us happening from matter and energy and just chances, we should not have these immaterial, intangible things like logic, reason, thinking minds, love, relationships. So these things point to something outside of ourselves, outside of the material world, which is what we would call God. So without ever having to open up a religious document, we see that there is some sort of God that comes into existence that is immaterial, spaceless, timeless, personal, powerful, intelligent, thinking being. So the question becomes, if there is a God, which God is it? Because we have a lot of religions in the world, we have a lot of worldviews, and they all contradict each other. So they cannot all be true at the same time. They can't all be true. If, again, we talked about A and not A cannot both be true. Otherwise you get war is peace and freedom is slavery. Those things do not work together. So the very fact that they contradict one another means that one has to be correct and the other one has to be incorrect, because you can have two things that are opposite be correct at the same time. And when it comes to the three major worldviews, you have monotheism, which is God made all. That's Judaism, Christianity, Islam. You have pantheism, which is God is all. Buddhism, Hinduism, New Age religions. And then you have atheism, which is no God at all, which is religious humanism and agnostic or not really sure. And these views all contradict each other. And I want to read this quote from a pastor's website. And he said, "What you and I share in common is that life has to be about more than jobs, vacations, bills, movies, outdoor barbecues, and traffic jams. We were born for a cause, to be part of a movement that changes the landscape of society for the better. We were born to be part of God's kingdom, to serve him and to make him known among the nations of the earth." I hope you tune into next week's episode, which is going to be titled, If God, Why Jesus? And it's going to be about why Christians believe that Jesus is God, why we follow him, and what that means for the world. And as always, what I have to say is nowhere nearly as important as what God has to say. So I'm going to leave you off with a word from him. And that's found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible never tells us how God created. Science is the study of process. It just tells us that God created. So guys, I hope this episode has blessed you. I hope it made you curious about God, curious about why you believe the things that you do, why you think the things that you think, and just have a desire to start to look into it a little bit deeper. Spend the time to think about these topics, what you're living for, and why you think that might be true. God bless you, and as always, stay holy.